My name is Diane Skidmore, and I'm an artist that works with fabric and fiber. I've been making quilts for 41 years. I come from a long line of quilt makers that goes back to my grandmother, who was a daughter of a pioneer in Oregon, and I discovered quilts when I was 20 years old. I was a art student at the University of Arizona with no direction, and visited my Aunt Flossie, who was a farmer in Oregon, and she was a quilt maker, and I'd really never seen quilts before, and fell in love with that medium. 40 years is a long time to make quilts, and my work has really evolved from very traditional to kind of wildly experimental now.
I'm Cheryl Adam. I have been quilting since 1982. It was a hobby at that time. I very quickly started designing my own quilts. My degree's in architectural engineering, so I knew how to design. Nobody had ever told me it was hard to design a quilt. From there, I got laid off of engineering and was asked by a friend to help her in her business with working with fabric companies. Since then, it's turned into my own business. I've done a book. I've worked with fabric companies, other companies. I do patterns. I have been in magazines. And I'm on the internet in some ways.
My name is Evelyn Young. I live in Leroy, Illinois. I started quilting about 16 years ago. A coworker who sat near me was quilting, and she kept bringing in blocks that she'd made or fabric she bought and saying, "Look at this, isn't this cool?" And I decided I was going to make a quilt. So the very first quilt that I made, I walked into a store and I looked around. I found a pattern I liked. I walked up to the counter with that pattern in my hand and said, "I want the fabrics to make these, to make this." And I wanted exactly the same fabrics that were in the picture. And now I would never do that. I always have to kind of look at the pattern, put my own spin on it, interpret it for myself. That's why I don't buy kits, because I like to choose the fabrics myself.
When I started making quilts or quilted items when I was 20, which was a long time ago, I used traditional designs and patterns that you would find in books and redrew them, and there were really at that point in time no instruction manuals or even good cotton fabric in the stores, and I just had to teach myself how to sew, and sewing by hand. If you could look at my early work, you would laugh. I think most quilters that have worked over the years would really tell good stories on their beginning work, because it was really a little rough. But over the years, I made bed quilts, and mostly designs that I took from traditional designs and then changed them somehow to make them interesting, and using kind of non-traditional colors. Back in the 80s, I started using colored quilting thread. A lot of people weren't doing that. And I've shown some things in different shows nationally.
About 60% of my time is spent on actual money-making work, and that can be from companies that make equipment which they want me to use to design a quilt, such as dies, which is what I used in the Steampunk Garden, or fabric companies that want me to introduce a new line of fabric, anywhere from actually making, designing and making a quilt to doing a virtual quilt on the computer, both with directions, just depending on how far along in the printing process they are with the fabric. I also have done articles for magazines, designed quilts for them, and done a book in the meantime. When I'm not doing that, and I'm not making baby quilts for my kids' friends and tote bags for whatever, for gifts, I like to do my ideas, which then becomes not much time. I usually have an idea in mind. A lot of times, because of my background and because I'm old enough to have had to do things with pencil and paper, I use a piece of graph paper and I do some rough sketches of what I'd like the quilt to end up with. Nothing very detailed at all, just to see if I like the layout and if I think the design's going to work. Then I head to my fabric stash, which has become sort of enormous over the years, not only from what I've purchased, but because I work for fabric companies, they also send me fabric. And I do a little shopping in there and see what kind of fabrics I can pull out and see if I need to fill in any gaps that I think are going to happen. I usually then start making the pieces that I want to do, whether it be applique or pieced. I then make some sample blocks, whether they be applique or pieced, to see if I like the colors, to see if I like the design, to see how it's going to, if it's going to work out the way I thought it was going to work out. Once that happens, I can then determine if there's any gaps in my fabrics, which then will involve a shopping trip to fill out the holes. And then I start making lots and lots of pieces, and I have a tendency to be one of these quilters that makes many more pieces and blocks than you will actually need in your quilt. And that gives me the ability to really lay out the quilt and change and move things around until I get it exactly the way I want it.
Many quilters probably go shopping when they're ready to start a new project. That's not how I work. I am a fabric collector, so I visit quilt shops, and when I see fabric that I like, I buy it and I put it in my stash. And then when I'm ready to start a project, I don't go shopping. I just come to my stash. And I would never be able to find the combinations of fabric that I use if I tried to go shopping, because some of the fabrics wouldn't be available any longer. I probably start by, once I have a pattern in mind and I know what blocks I'm going to use, I decide on a color scheme. So I might decide, for instance, the quilt I just finished, I might decide I was going to make a red and brown quilt. And then I would come over here and I would look at my reds and my browns, and from that what I decided for the quilt I am about to finish is that I wanted to use some deep kind of dark reds, and that I wanted the browns to be pretty dark. So I didn't pull too many of the light browns, I pulled the darker ones. And then for the light fabrics in the background of the blocks, you probably can't see it here, but you know, I've got this whole shelf is devoted to light prints with red background, with red figures in them. This is blue, etc. So then I limited the lights that I used to the ones that would work with the reds and browns. And as I selected them, I didn't use all of them, but I made sure I used some that were big prints, some that were small prints, some that were kind of plaid looking, some that were stripy, some that were toiles. This is a design wall, and it's a relatively new thing for me. I just got it this past winter, and I really love it. Because one of the things I like to do is just make a lot of blocks and then arrange them and kind of play with them. So, oh, what looks good here? Or what if I put them in a different order? So as you can see here, like these aren't sewn together. This one still needs to be trimmed. But if I wanted, I could take this one and move it over here and just change them around and explore options. And it's very helpful once you've arranged it one way to take a picture before you move them all around, because you might decide you like the old way better.
The kinds of things that I make now kind of fall into a few different categories. You know, I've been making boxes. I like covering boxes with fabric and either doing kind of funny, fanciful, humorous things or landscapes. You've seen the piece that I had in the Preserving Parkland's show, and so that was something new, but in that idea of making these boxes that are smaller and rich with beading and embroidery. The other piece, and I guess when, you know, I have people that want to see those, I just want them to be drawn into that piece, enjoy the color, enjoy the embellishments, and it's a joyful experience of color and texture and light. But there's another kind of quilt that I make, and they're kind of therapy quilts. I use poetry about hope and about overcoming challenges in life, and I've made some of those pieces, and they have a depth of feeling for me in them that is so strong that when people see them, I would hope that they feel that emotion. It's not about color so much, and the color plays a part of evoking that emotion, but I would hope that they sense that.
When I'm quilting at home, if I don't have something that I have to do, I can spend all day piecing blocks or quilting. You know, I get up to take breaks, but you know, I can keep at it for a long time. Sometimes friends that I have, you know, we'll get together for a full day or maybe a weekend to quilt together, and there's a little bit of work involved in that because we're all machine quilters. And so when we go to someone's house to quilt, we're taking chairs and sewing machines and baskets full of things and supplies and rulers, and it's a lot of work to do, but it's incredibly fun.
So you asked me if I have any UFOs or unfinished objects. This room is filled with them, and you know, right here there's a couple projects that are color is being auditioned for. That's really when I work. A lot of it goes on in my head. I can see the images in my head, and I can redesign in my head. And so, you know, if I get to an impasse, it's like you put it into the brain and it just cooks. And then some evening or some morning or some moment at work, you know, oh, well, I could do this or I could do that, and kind of morph. So I feel, you know, there's a project with a box and a landscape over there on the work table, and there's a quilt top I just finished that's been in the works for 15 years.
I tend to, because of my work, my stuff gets picked up and put down a lot. And I will start on one thing and have this grand idea for it, and then have work, so I have to put it away. And then by the time I get to my own work again, I've had a whole nother grand idea, so I start on that. And that happens quite a lot. And so I have more than a couple of UFOs in the work in this workshop. So.
I don't feel like I need to master every quilting skill there is. It's just kind of as I go along day to day. If I get a notion to do something, I take a class or look for videos or read about it or ask friends, how do you do that?
But I think that's the really neat thing about making quilts, is that there are so many different skills and steps to them. There's the design phase, there's the cutting out phase, there's the sewing together phase, there's the quilting, planning the design, because that's another whole element you lay over what you are piecing or what you are appliquing. And then I like to bead things now. I bead edges and embellish, and so I think legitimately, if you have all those different processes, you can have multiple things in different stages and, you know, not feel bad about it at all. So, yeah.
I believe that every quilt deserves to be displayed. Even if it didn't turn out to be your best work, I think that it deserves to be displayed. And it might just be a simple quilt, But someone might go to see that quilt, and maybe they've never made a quilt, and they might look at it and say, well, you know, I think I could do that. Or someone maybe has made a lot of quilts, but they haven't done that particular thing. And they might look at it and say, you know, I'm going to try machine applique.
I think a lot of people, especially in the Midwest, tend to think of quilts as that blanket that their grandmother or their aunt or somebody made in the past that was a very traditional pattern, and that's all there is to quilting. I don't think people realize how much of an art it is. Even the very traditional patterns are beautifully done now and are considered piece of artworks, but they have developed so much more into actual art pieces that sometimes when people see them in a magazine or on TV or something can not believe that it's actually a quilt. And so I think it's very important to get that out there so more people can have the chance to see really beautiful and different quilts.